Welcome to God, Country, and the American Story. I'm Billy Hallowell, and I am incredibly excited to be joining you for this new series, a new podcast from the Washington Times. We are going to be exploring something truly unique: the powerful role that the Christian faith has had not only in the lives of American leaders today, but in the lives of our founders, of the people who crafted, molded, and created America. There is so much we are going to tackle on this podcast. I'm excited to sit down with lawmakers, officials, business titans, historians, faith leaders, and cultural influencers to dive deep into history, the past, and even today. How is the Christian faith and Judeo-Christian principles shaping America? How has God guided this nation to become the most powerful country in the history of humanity? That and so much more on God, Country, and the American Story. We are going to be honoring America's spiritual heritage, and we're doing this at an interesting time because we are about to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. So join us here on this show for thought-provoking conversations that uncover the soul of a nation that is rooted in God and destined for greatness. Our first guest on God, Country, and the American Story is none other than Senator Tim Scott. He is joining us to talk about his new book, why he believes faith is central to the American story, and so much more. With no further ado, here is Senator Tim Scott. Senator Tim Scott, welcome to God, Country, and the American Story. Appreciate you joining me today.
Absolutely, Billy. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about. You have a new book, One Nation, Always Under God, Profiles in Christian Courage. We're going to talk about that. But I want to ask you a general question first. Why
Sure.
do you think it's important for Americans to recognize the role that faith, and in particular Christianity, has actually played in our nation's foundation?
I think the whole notion of American exceptionalism can only be explained through something divine, and that would be our love and affection for the Creator. The bottom line is simply this: America is an exceptional nation because we are a good nation founded upon Christian principles, and it's that foundation that allows us to see a springboard for our future. So, if you want to know what the future looks like, if we adhere to our Judeo-Christian foundational principles, we have a great future. Without that, we do not have a good future. And so I think it's really important for us to focus on the main thing. And the main thing is who we are is absolutely, positively, and unequivocally a part of the story of God.
Yeah, and it's crazy because so many people today seem to want to ignore that story of God. They seem to want to pretend it
Yes.
didn't happen. They want to dismiss that faith played any role. What do you think drives that? Because it's not a new issue, but it is a persistent issue that we have seen in our politics and our education system even.
I think, Billy, I could be wrong, but I personally think that a major part of our misconception of what makes us great are those folks who want to believe that we can be perfected, that man is perfectible, that somehow with the right education, with the right Ivy League education, you will find yourself absent of all the flaws that have really framed history. And the truth is exactly the opposite. Romans 8:31 and verse 32 tell us the best path towards wholeness is to abide in truth. And unfortunately, when you go to these great schools these days, you walk away with thinking that your truth is the truth. And actually, there's no such thing as your truth. There's only the truth. So an objective standard is a necessary component for any society to flourish, especially one as diverse as ours. For us to make diversity actually a weapon for good as opposed to a weapon against us, we have to go back to frankly, our birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, where we hear that our Creator gave each of us this notion of intrinsic value, and that no matter what we look like, our value comes from God, and there are rights that come from God. And when that's true, then you have to have a different level of respect for who we are. Without that, absent of that, you go to those who believe that you can somehow become perfect through education. Education is important, but it pales in comparison to the faith-filled experience and, frankly, education at the cross.
Yeah, no, and I love that because really what you're talking about, and I love this conversation because it's politics, it's culture, but it's also theology and this issue of sin, right? When we talk about relativism and this idea that, we have to accept everything and that everybody's truth, individual truth is right. Well, you work in politics, you know for a fact everybody has a
That's right.
line, right? I mean, reflect on that a little bit because I think it's interesting. The people who
Yeah.
often say that relativism is the way to go and that everything is true, they tend to be the ones that suddenly have a problem when there's a Christian ideal that is brought forward, right? Or when there's a specific biblical ideal.
Yeah, Billy, one of the things that we see in today's culture of everyone has their own version of the truth is that those who want us to be more tolerant are typically the less tolerant. The fact of the matter is, it's frustrating as a Dickens when someone says, everybody should have an opinion, but then when we voice our faith-filled opinion, it is rejected by uh, modern society and frankly the mass media that wants anything other than Christianity. And frankly, I don't see them attacking any other religions in this country like they attack our faith as Christians. Why? Well, because they would be, of course, rejected by the masses. The only place that people are comfortable attacking from a religious perspective is Christianity. And we should ask the question why. And the answer is simply this, that anytime you believe that there is a relative nature, somehow you can be subjective in your approach, you reject a biblical standard that says there is one way and one truth. That is what I know to be the truth, that there is simply a single definition of truth. It comes from a Judeo-Christian foundation. The bedrock of all of human history flows through that truth.
All right, now I want to talk about the book in a moment. We've got a lot more to talk about, but what is America without Christianity? What is it? Like who are we without that baseline?
Let us, Billy, never find out the answer to that question. Here's what we know. America is the city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan talked about it from the book of John, by the way. He understood that we were exceptional as a people because we had this notion that there is something bigger than ourselves, that there is something more important than ourselves, that we have a responsibility to do something greater than any one individual, that the whole of us is how we become the city on the hill. And frankly, throughout all of human history and specifically throughout all of American history, we have stories of individuals who rose to the occasion to make the notion of American exceptionalism exactly perfect. I would say that if you think about Alexis de Tocqueville, who came to America in the 1830s and was trying to figure out what made America unique and specifically exceptional, he went through all of the institutions and concluded it's not education, it's not the government. It's frankly, as he entered into the houses of worship, into churches, he said they were on fire. And that is what made America the most remarkable country on the planet. It is, in fact, this notion that we must be good in order to be great.
Well, and this is the thing that people seem to struggle with because as we look at the history of the country and we look at the fact that human beings who are sinful make up a country. And so a country is going to have things that it does that are not right and that are also right because we're humans, right?
Yes.
Yet people make a decision when it comes to America, people who live in America, where for a lot of us, we say this is a wonderful country despite all the flaws. This is an amazing country. God had a hand in this country. Then others say this is a terrible country. It's awful. Like reflect on that a little bit because
Yeah.
again, sin is part of our existence. And so do we let sin sully the entirety of a nation because of negative things that have happened?
Well, if you can find a country that you can visit on the planet where there is no sin, where there are no flaws, make that your home. I found a country, I have traveled this world, and I can tell you one thing. The closest thing to perfect in this world, from a country perspective, is the United States of America. We should all be proud. It's one of the things that I said that caught everyone's attention back when I was responding to President Biden's inaugural address. I said, America is not a racist country. And the world went crazy. I got attacked vehemently by people who said, how can you, as a black man from the city where the Civil War started, make such a crazy statement? It wasn't crazy at all. The fact of the matter is that we have struggled with what we call the original sin of slavery, and we are overcoming it. The notion of who we are as Americans is a group of people who are going to form a more perfect union. What does that mean? We're not there yet. But what does it mean? We are striving for perfection. We are striving for wholeness. That means that we acknowledge the flaws of the past so that we are educated by it, so that we won't do it again. That is what I am so proud of this country. We should be proud of the fact that we look in the mirror and we see the flaws and we strive to make sure that tomorrow they're different than today. It is that blessing that makes me so proud to be an American. And that's why I hope that we are always one nation, always under God. It is the only way that we remain the city on the hill. It is the only way that we are the beacon in the midst of the darkness, and we are the hope to all of the world.
Well, I love that. And that is the perfect segue into the book, One Nation, Always Under God, Profiles in Christian Courage. You know, you had a chance to look at a lot of different stories. And
Yes.
when you come away from that now and you have this book and you have this finished product, what is the profile or story? And this might be tough to answer, I don't know, but that really stuck with you or resonated with you the most?
It really is hard to answer that question. I will say there are a couple of them. I think so often thinking about the original sin, since you and I have been talking about flaws, looking back, I think of William Lloyd Garrison, who was an abolitionist. He did everything in his power to fight against slavery because he was a Christian, because he understood that within our Declaration of Independence, that we said that all people were equal. They were created by our God equally, and that we had to defend freedom for all people. It's like Abraham Lincoln once said, I'm paraphrasing him, he says, if you do not want to be anyone's slave, then don't be anyone's slave master. I think about the story of Jim Lovell, a NASA astronaut who 200,000 miles away from Earth found himself in a bad, terrible situation. All hope being lost. I think about how he came to pray. And I think about other astronauts who, when they were looking down, they quoted the Lord's Prayer out of Matthew 6. I think about how powerful our nation is, that we struggle with things like mental illness, something that we see happening throughout our country. Because of COVID, we saw a 31% increase in teenagers being brought to the emergency room because of challenges of mental illness. And I thought back about Dorothea Dix, who spent her life fighting for a more clear, decisive approach to people with mental illness. And she fought her entire life to make sure that there was respect and dignity, like places for those who are mentally ill, 50, 60, 70, a long time ago. So every day and in every way, you can think through amazing stories of people who did the most remarkable things because they felt this call, they were urged almost to stand up for those who can't stand for themselves. And that's the story of faith in America. It's the Proverbs 31:8, I believe, that says, stand up for those who can't stand for themselves. So in One Nation, Always Under God, you can read profile after profile after profile of courage. People doing the most remarkable things, ordinary people, people like you, Billy, and people like me, who do the remarkable things that need to be done because God deposits in us a desire to get it done. And then he helps equip us with friends, sometimes enemies, who come together to sharpen the sword. So we as a nation, we are now the brightest light on the planet.
I love that you're telling these stories. And on this show, that's what we focus on. We focus on America and history and how faith has shaped so much of what is happening here. And it continues to. And I think of your story, I've interviewed you numerous times over the years, and hearing your backstory and your faith journey and where you are today. A lot of people look at politics and they say, well, how can anybody handle politics? How could you be a Christian and be in politics? What is that like? How do you keep your sanity, and how do you hold on to your values and your faith? Because here you are talking about faith. You have always integrated your message of faith in with the work that you do. What continues to drive you in that work? Because I know it's not easy.
Well, no, Billy, it's certainly not easy, but one of the things that I talk about in One Nation Always Under God is the importance of having those profiles available so that we can remind ourselves that even in the darkest times, there is a reason to be hopeful. And I will say that in a very partisan time in our nation's history, perhaps not the most partisan time, but a very partisan time, what keeps me hopeful and optimistic is that every day I start my day off in the Word of God. I start my day off reading the book of Proverbs. I start my day off, as I did at least this morning, reading John 4. And I see this contrast between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. And I ask myself, how does that play out in 2025? And I find a way to apply the scriptures that I read in the morning all day long. That keeps me anchored to something that is greater than me. It keeps me almost fueled by a source of omnipotence, unlimited power. And by doing so, I don't have perfect days. I'm a flawed individual, but I feel like my days are complete when I start and finish them with the Lord. I feel like I reach more people when I remember that I am a broken vessel and God only uses broken vessels. It reminds me of the stories that I read in the gospel of Jesus Christ, but it also reminds me to be an example of things to do as opposed to a warning of things not to do. And so that keeps me motivated and focused every day.
No, I love that, especially in the type of industry that you are in politics. I want to ask you about culture, because as you're putting this book out, we're at a really interesting time in America right now. We're watching young people flock to get baptized. We're seeing campus revivals.
Yes.
We're seeing things that I would not have predicted 2 or 3 years ago even
Totally
happened
agree.
before us. What do you think is happening when it comes to faith in America right now?
Billy, I must concede that I was surprised to watch I think it was Ohio State University's football team lead the entire campus back towards issues of faith. With their energy and their enthusiasm, they were on fire for the Lord. It changes everything. I believe people have always been hungry for the truth. We were sold a lie. In education, it became more about indoctrination than educate. Instead of being taught how to think, we were taught what to think. And on campuses like Ohio State University, when you see this fire on the campus and you see young men and young women praising the Lord as we see on campus, it is a sign that God's not finished with this country. I will tell you that even in the times that we're living in, we see anti Semitism raging on college campuses. We see incidents in the streets of New York. The people who are leading the charge against that are Christians, joining hands with their Jewish brothers and sisters, because the word of God is clear. And as we operate in that fullness and that truth, I think America stops and says, that's different. People who stand up for people not like themselves, why do you do that? Well, it sounds like Galatians 3:28, that we're all part of the same family, and we recognize that. And so when we see that happening, I think it's a powerful force for good, and it makes people stop and question, why are they different? And the answer is not who we are, but whose we are.
Mm. That is powerful. So I'm going to ask you a question that might sound strange. I don't think it will, though, because you'll understand where it's coming from. When you look at Ephesians 6, and for those who don't know Ephesians 6, it talks about a spiritual battle that we're in.
Sure.
That what we're watching unfold before us is not just temporal, that there's a spiritual element that is impacting that. How often, as a person who is you're voting on very big issues that affect people's lives, and you're in these political battles. But how often do you pause and reflect on the fact that there is a spiritual element to some of these things, especially what you just mentioned, the anti-Semitism? I think there's a huge spiritual element to that. How much does
Absolutely.
that sort of shape your understanding as you're voting, as you're just dealing with these issues?
Well, you won't be surprised to know that I am a feeble human being at times, and I need all the help I can get. And one of the ways I find that assistance or that help that I'm looking for is by turning to Ephesians 6:10 through 16, and walking through the armor that is for a spiritual battle. And the armor that he describes in Ephesians is an armor that we're all familiar with. And he does such a good job of making an analogy between what we're familiar with and what we need to know for the spiritual warfare that we're in. When he talks about the shield that quenches the fiery darts of the wicked one, well, if you think that there is a God, then there's probably a devil. And because there is a devil and there's evil forces, the only question is, if you don't believe it, it doesn't stop it from being true. It just means that you're unprepared for the battle. And so Ephesians 6, 10 through 16 is about putting on an armor or being equipped for a war or a fight that you might not be able to see with your eyes. But if you've ever been tempted to do something that you know you shouldn't do, probably called Monday, or Tuesday or Wednesday, the question is, where does that come from? Well, there's a source for evil in this world. We know that there's a force for good in this world. And that's why when you read in Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6, that we should lean not on our own understanding, but in all of our ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct our path. That is to acknowledge that there is a spiritual force of good. Well, unfortunately, there's a spiritual force that actually wants to tempt us. You can read in Galatians 5, 21 about these fruits that come from the flesh, and in verse 22, fruits that come from the spirit. You can read in Romans 7 that he does such a good job Paul does such a good job in Romans 7 that says, why do I do the things that I don't want to do? And in chapter 8, verse 1 says, now there is no condemnation. It's understanding the contrast that exists in the Word of God to help us understand what to do and what not to do, and then what to do when we do what we should not do. And that's what Romans 7 is all about. And so having that understanding embedded in our hearts doesn't make us perfect, but it certainly should require us to strive to be better every day than we were the day before. Some days you take 2 steps back and 1 day forward, but most days you take 2 steps forward and only 1 back.
Well, I love that. And Senator, I appreciate, as always, your time. Your book is One Nation, Always Under God, Profiles in Christian Courage. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, sir. You can get that now at Amazon.com or any bookstore where books are sold.
That's all for today's God, Country, and the American Story. Make sure you tune in 2 weeks for another episode of this powerful show. We're going to be looking deep at America's history and so much more. If you want to suggest topics and guests for this show, we are more than open to hearing that. You can head on over to billyhallowell.com, fill out the contact form, and let me know who you want to hear on God, Country, and the American Story. We appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.